He didn't even look at me when he said it, just leaned in and whispered, "You can have her." The saloon was smoke-thick and sour with spilled whiskey. Somewhere, a piano clanked off-key, ignored. The walls creaked with every gust of wind like they were ashamed of what they held inside. Miriam Dalton stood near the doorway, a cracked shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She'd been summoned like a dog, told to stand still and keep quiet. Her husband Ellis was at the faro table again, cheeks flushed, voice slurred. He'd been losing all night. He'd already wagered the mule, then the saddle, then their last 2 blankets. Now, nothing was left but her. She watched him throw the last coin purse across the table like it weighed 1,000 pounds. When the dealer shook his head, Ellis didn't beg. He leaned in close to the man across the table, tall, broad, wearing a long trail coat, and said something low. Miriam saw the stranger's eyes flick toward her. Just once. Ellis didn't turn around, didn't ask her permission, didn't even say her name. The stranger stood up slow and measured. The table went silent. Then he said, "She rides with me tonight," and no one in that room said a word. The wagon ride out of town was silent. Miriam sat stiff-backed beside the stranger, her hands gripping the sides of the bench until her knuckles ached. She didn't cry. Not yet. She'd learned long ago tears didn't change anything, especially not Ellis. The man beside her didn't speak. He didn't look at her, didn't try to touch her. He just drove the wagon steady, eyes forward, reins loose in his gloved hands. His coat was dust-covered, but his posture was calm. Like this wasn't the strangest night of his life. But it was for hers. 2 hours earlier, she'd been sweeping the back stoop of their rented shack when Ellis stormed in, breath hot with, "Whiskey! Get your coat! You're coming with me!" "Why?" she asked. He didn't answer, just grabbed her shawl and shoved it into her arms. She should have known then. There was only one reason he ever asked her to go near that saloon. The man's name was Silas Beckett. She'd overheard it whispered once inside the saloon, spoken with a mix of caution and respect. A rancher. Some said he was a widower. Others said he'd once been a bounty hunter. No one said much at all, but when Ellis offered his wife to wipe clean a stack of gambling debt, Silas didn't flinch. He didn't grin like the others might have. Didn't ask questions, just nodded. "She rides with me tonight." That was all. Now the trail twisted beneath them, heading west into the hills. Miriam kept glancing sideways, expecting the worst. A demand, a threat, some sign of ownership. Instead, Silas simply said, "It'll be cold tonight." She blinked. "What?" "You can ride up front, or in the back. There's a blanket under the seat." She didn't move. Her voice came out thinner than she wanted. "What do you want from me?" He didn't look at her. "Nothing." That's not what Ellis thought. He finally turned his head, just slightly. "Your husband lost a bet. I paid the debt. That's the end of him." "And me?" He paused, then said it plain. "You're not a debt, just a person who needed getting out." They reached the ranch by moonlight. It wasn't grand, but it was solid, fenced pastures, a barn built to last, and a small house with smoke curling from the chimney. It smelled like pine and horses and something warm still baking in the oven. Silas helped her down from the wagon but didn't touch her. He led her up the porch steps and opened the door with a key from his coat pocket. Rooms to the left, beds made, water on the table. She stepped inside, wary. The house was too quiet, too still. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He shrugged off his coat, hanging it by the door. "Maybe because no one did it for my wife. Maybe because a man who trades his wife for poker chips ought to lose something more." Miriam stood frozen in the doorway. Silas turned. "No one's going to touch you here, not unless you ask them to. You got my word." She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, blanket pulled around her shoulders, like armor. She watched the window until the stars blurred from exhaustion, and somewhere in the early hours, with the wind sighing through the shutters, she realized something that made her feel both safer and lonelier. This man didn't want her, and after years of being used, blamed, sold, and silenced, she didn't know what that meant anymore. Miriam awoke to birdsong, not shouting, not crashing pans or slammed doors, just birds, chirping lazily outside the window of a room she didn't recognize at first. Then it all came back: the saloon, the bet, the stranger with the quiet eyes, Silas Beckett. She sat up slowly. The bed was clean, the sheets worn but fresh-smelling. A glass pitcher of water and a folded towel sat on the dresser. No lock on the door, no chain. Just space. She moved through the morning like a shadow, unsure what to touch. She'd spent years walking on eggshells. Now she walked on air and didn't trust the ground. Silas was outside by the corral feeding the horses. He nodded when he saw her. No smile, no expectation. "You sleep?" She nodded. "A little. Water's on the stove if you want coffee." She hesitated. "I don't want to be in the way." "You're not." That became the rhythm. No questions, no instructions. Just quiet coexistence. By the third day, she started sweeping the porch. No one asked her to. By the fifth, she was in the garden pulling weeds. It felt strange, doing things not out of fear, but because it helped, because it passed the time. Silas noticed but never commented. He was a man of few words and fewer movements. He rose before dawn, fed the animals, mended what needed fixing, and spent long hours on the land. His grief lived close to the surface, but he never let it show in anger. Just stillness. The house bore traces of the woman who had once lived there. A floral shawl still hung on a hook in the hall. A small book of psalms sat beside the bed in the spare room. Miriam never touched them, but she saw them and felt the weight of them. One evening, rain rolled in, heavy, cold, insistent. The fire crackled, and the silence between them stretched like a comfortable blanket. She finally asked, "What happened to her?" Silas stared at the fire. "Her name was Anna." "She died?" He nodded once. "Childbirth. Wasn't nothing I could do. Couldn't even bury her till spring. Ground was too hard." Miriam said nothing. He continued, voice low. "Town blamed her for not being strong enough. I blamed myself for letting him." She glanced at him, searching for something in his face. Guilt, sorrow, resentment. But he just sat there, steady as the firelight. "You built all this yourself?" She asked. "After," he said. "Had to keep my hands busy. Pain don't get quieter. You just build louder things around it." Over the next weeks, she learned his routines. He wasn't a cruel man, wasn't a lonely man either. Not exactly. He just didn't fill silence for the sake of it. And somehow, that helped her breathe again. She cooked breakfast some mornings. He'd nod his thanks. She cleaned out the root cellar. He left extra candles on the table the next day. He never asked about Ellis, never asked about what had happened before. That, too, was a kindness. One night after supper, Miriam stood washing dishes at the basin when she caught her own reflection in the darkened window. Her hair was longer now, her cheeks less sunken. She looked alive. Not just breathing, living. Silas came in from outside, wet from rain, hat in hand. He placed a wrapped cloth on the table. "Fresh biscuits from the neighbor's wife," he explained. She was suspicious at first, but Silas reassured her. "They ain't pity," he said. "Just people being people again." She turned to him then, really turned. "Why did you take me?" she asked. He paused. "Because you looked like no one else was going to." "That's all?" Silas looked down at his hands, calloused, weathered, gentle. "And maybe," he said softly, "because I knew what it felt like to have no say in how your life went next." That night, as Miriam lay in bed listening to the wind outside the cabin walls, something inside her shifted. She was still, afraid, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of him. The first time Miriam returned to town, heads turned like a storm had blown through. She kept her chin up, but her stomach knotted with every step. Dry Creek hadn't changed, Still the same crooked signs, same cracked windows, same women who judged behind pursed lips. But she had. The whispers came fast. That's her. The one Ellis traded. Living with the rancher now. She didn't flinch. She'd flinched enough for a lifetime. Silas had offered to go alone to pick up supplies, but she insisted. If I can't walk through town without hiding, then I'm still his. He didn't argue, just rode beside her without a word, letting her decide what silence meant. They stopped at the general store first. The owner, Mr. Trask, froze when he saw her, then cleared his throat, nodded stiffly, and began measuring flour like nothing was amiss. People stared. No one spoke, until Ellis showed up. He was thinner now, greasier. His eyes darted too fast, too desperate. Well, look what the wind dragged in, he slurred, swaggering closer. How's life in the barn, darlin'? You takin' to milkin'. Cows better than bein' a wife? Silas stepped forward, calm and slow. Ellis grinned at him. Ain't you tired of babysitting used goods? Miriam didn't move, but Silas did. In one motion, he pushed Ellis back against the post outside the store. Not hard, just firm. She's not yours, Silas said, voice flat. Ellis laughed bitter. She was my wife. You gave that up. The night you sold her. Ellis spat on the ground. She was never worth much anyhow. Miriam finally stepped forward then, her voice steady. No, Ellis, you just couldn't afford what I was worth. Ellis looked stunned for half a second. Then something colder settled in his eyes. This ain't over, he muttered. But he left, and no one stopped him. The ride home was quiet. Miriam held the reins this time. Thank you, she said softly. Silas kept his eyes ahead. Didn't do it for thanks. I know, she said. That's why it matters. The next few days passed with tension simmering low beneath the surface. Miriam could feel it in her shoulders, in the way Silas checked the locks each night, in the way the horses stirred more easily in the barn. She didn't ask if he was worried. She already knew he was, but she also knew something else. She wasn't running anymore. One afternoon, she walked into town again, this time alone. Not to provoke, not to prove, just to reclaim. She visited the seamstress, bought new thread, spoke kindly to a young girl sweeping a porch, and when Mr. Trask offered her change, she held his gaze and said, "Keep it, for being decent." Word spread just like before, but this time slower, gentler. Something in the wind was changing. That night she sat on the porch with Silas, watching dusk roll over the hills. He asked, "Why go back again?" she thought, for a long time before answering. Because shame only lives where you leave it hidden. Silas nodded slowly. You ever think about leaving? Going somewhere new? I used to, she said. But now, this place remembers what happened. And so do I. That makes it mine again. Later, she found the box in the drawer. The one with her old wedding ring. She took it out, held it in her palm. The metal was dull, the engraving worn. It had once meant something. Then it hadn't. Now, it was just a weight. She closed the box and slipped it back into the drawer. Not out of fear, out of peace. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it bloomed wild across the hills like something trying to make up for all the silence that came before. Miriam stood barefoot in the garden, hands in the dirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Around her, shoots of green peeked through the soil she'd turned herself. The morning breeze carried the scent of lilacs and clean air. She'd planted the first rose without asking Silas. She hadn't needed to. He just watched from the porch, with his coffee, and let her build what she wanted. It was hers after all, like the quiet peace that had taken root in her chest. Silas had changed too, not outwardly. He still moved slow, still rarely spoke more than necessary. But there was something softer in his stillness now. He started leaving the door unlatched when she went to town. Trusted she'd come back. She always did. They never spoke of love. Not directly. There were no declarations, no proposals. But they moved around each other like people who understood the cost of being misunderstood. He fixed the creaky floorboard outside her bedroom. She hemmed the cuffs on his winter coat. He left blackberries by her plate. She stirred honey into his coffee without asking. She hadn't known love could be like that. One evening after supper, she sat beside him on the porch. The sky was streaked with orange and lavender. The air buzzed with crickets and the last stretch of light. She looked at him. "You ever want children?" she asked. He didn't answer at first. "I did," he said finally. "Still might." She nodded. "I don't know if I can. Not after." She didn't finish. He didn't press. "If we never have 'em," he said, "we'll still have something." "What's that?" He turned to her. For once, his voice was almost gentle. "A home, built without fear." That night she opened the drawer where the old ring still sat. She took it out, weighed it in her hand one last time. Then she walked to the river that ran beyond the back pasture, stood knee-deep in the water, and let it go. The current took it without ceremony. She didn't cry, just turned and walked back toward the lantern glow of the house behind her. Weeks passed. The garden grew. Townsfolk stopped whispering and started waving. Some came by for eggs or biscuits. Silas didn't mind. One morning a young ranch hand asked if she and Mr. Beckett were married. She smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "No, we just live honest with each other." The boy frowned. "Ain't that the same thing?" Miriam laughed. "Might be better." She never went back to being Mrs. Dalton. She never needed to take Silas's name. But when the preacher came by one Sunday and called her Miss Hargrave, she nodded and said, "That'll do just fine." Final scene. She hung a painted sign by the garden gate one morning. It read simply, "No debts here, just days worth living." Silas watched her from the porch, arms folded. "You put that there for me?" he asked. She shook her head. "For me. I wasn't bought, I wasn't saved, I wasn't anyone's second chance, I just got a life, and finally I made it mine."